talk. Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman. I'm a producer and editor here in the Author Events Office, and it's my great pleasure to be here to introduce tonight's authors. Richard Russo won the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for his novel Empire Falls. He's also the author of several other acclaimed novels, the story collection Trajectory, and a book of essays about writing titled The Destiny Thief. His novel Nobody's Fool, starring the world-worn protagonist Sully and the irresistible residents of North Bath, New York, was adapted into a popular film starring Paul Newman and spawned a popular follow-up, Everybody's Fool. Russo has also written several screenplays, including Twilight, The Ice Harvest, and the HBO adaptation of Empire Falls. His new book is titled Chances Are. In it, three sexagenarian men convene on Martha's Vineyard to reminisce about their college days and solve a mystery that has haunted them for decades. A review in the Washington Post proclaims that this novel creates that uncanny sense of memories that feel simultaneously near and remote, and that the story will draw you back to the most consequential moments in your life. And isn't that perhaps the most we can ask of any work of fiction? Writer Amy Hempel was referred to by the Los Angeles Times as, quote, among the strongest voices in American fiction. She is the author of the celebrated short story collections Reasons to Live, At the Gates of the Animal Kingdom, The Dog of the Marriage, and the novella Tumble Home. The recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and the PEN Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story, she teaches in the creative writing programs at Bennington College and Stony, Brook, Southampton, and is a contributing editor at the Alaska Quarterly Review. A famously enthusiastic dog aficionado, she co-edited with the great Jim Shepard, Unleashed, Poems by Writers' Dogs. I won't further explain this, just go read it. Her new story collection is titled Sing to It. In it, she employs her singular style of prose to reveal characters in search of connection, compassion, and reckoning. NPR Books had this to say about it: there's not a story in Sing to It that's less than brilliant, and the collection itself is even greater than the sum of its parts, and that Hempel is, quote, an irreplaceable literary treasure who has mastered the art of the short story more skillfully than just about any other writer out there. High praise that I can only top by saying that when I read Reasons to Live almost 20 years ago, this author became one of my literary gods and is one of the reasons I became a writer. So the chances are you're going to have a great time tonight, so sing to it as we welcome first Amy Hempel to the Free Library.
Thank you so much. Lovely introduction. Thank you all for coming. What a treat to be here, reading with the person I am reading with. What boy. One of the things about this, how is the sound? Can you hear? I'm not spitting to peas. Okay. One of the things that's noticeable about Sing to It, this new collection, is that 10 of the 15 stories are shorts. I love the form. I love reading them, writing them, teaching it. I have recently taught a graduate class called Short, Prose Poem, or Couldn't Finish, because I got all kinds of variations on this form. So I'm going to read several of these extremely short pieces, starting with the title piece, Sing to It. At the end, he said, no metaphors, nothing is like anything else, except he said to me before he said that, make your hands a hammock for me. So there was one. He said, not even the rain, he quoted the poet, not even the rain has such small hands. So there was another. At the end, I wanted to comfort him, but what I said was, sing to it. The Arab proverb, when danger approaches, sing to it. Except I said to him before I said that, no metaphors. No one is like anyone else. But he said, please. So, at the end, I made my hands a hammock for him, my arms the trees. This next one, it's called The Orphan Lamb. It probably says something about me that I think of this as a love story. I really do. The Orphan Lamb. He carved the coat off the dead winter lamb, wiped her blood on his pants to keep a grip, circling first the hooves and cutting straight up each leg, then punching the skin loose from muscle and bone. He tied the skin with twine over the body of the orphan lamb, so the grieving ewe would know the scent and let the orphan lamb nurse. Or so he said. This was seduction. This was the story he told. Of all the farm boy stories he might have told, he chose the one where brutality saves a life. He wanted me to feel, when he fitted his body over mine, that this was how I would go on. This was how I would be known. Anyone here been to Greensboro, North Carolina? Yes? Oh, lots of you, fantastic. Those of you who raised your hands, have you been to Elsewhere? Has anyone been to, no hands? Okay. Elsewhere is an artists' cooperative, I guess you'd call it. It was, years ago, it was an old factory, like 3 floors, huge factory of sort of dry goods store. And the owner became pretty much of a hoarder and had room for a lot. And when she died, she left the place to her grandson, who was an artist and loved artists and making it possible for them to have places to do what they do. And so he started bringing artists in for, I think, month-long, or maybe a week-long, I think it was a month-long residencies, and named the place Elsewhere. And they could do anything they want, big installations, whole rooms, whatever they wanted. The only thing was they had to use materials from the former hoarder's store. The time I went, I saw something so extraordinary. I named the story, this next short story is called The Doll Tornado. Anyone interested can look up, you can Google Toy-nado, okay? You'll see why, and you'll see the piece I'm writing about. In a room in Greensboro, North Carolina, a tornado of dolls touches down. Dolls form the spout and darken the room with all that has been pulled into the funnel of dolls that has sucked up also a telephone, a xylophone, and the dolls are either whole or missing limbs, missing eyes, or have eyes locked open and hair on end. They are naked and clothed, new and old. The dolls that can talk are not talking. The dolls that can wet are dry. The cloud of dolls is somehow suspended from the ancient factory ceiling on the 3rd floor of a building that, if it ever caught fire, would go up like that. The dolls are no longer dolls. They're weather, storming into a room in the town where, down the street, a famous Woolworth's 5 and 10 is a civil rights museum, the lunch counter preserved, where 4 black students waited to be served on the first day of February 1960. You buy a ticket to get in to see it, and you buy a ticket for the doll tornado, and it's worth the price of admission both times to see what is commonplace now as it thunders back down. This is kind of a nasty one called The Correct Grip. A few days after the attack, the wife of the stranger who attacked me called me on the phone. She wanted to know if I was serious about her husband. She said he told her he was having an affair with me. She said she got my number from student services. Your husband broke into my apartment, I said, in the uninflected voice that had taken me this far. He threatened me with a knife. Did he use it? His wife asked. He used it to threaten me, I said. Because he used it on me once, she said conversationally. I have a scar on my forehead like a quarter moon. What do you look like, she asked. I told her. I played down my looks, but not so far that she would think that was what I was doing. You could be describing me, she said, sounding pleased. She said, I guess why I'm calling you is to see if I should stay and try to make it work. I told her I could not possibly advise her and gave her instead the number of a women's shelter in case he gave her more trouble. I reminded her what her husband had done to me. She said, would you like to have lunch sometime anyway, my treat? I told her I was moving out the next week. Saying so, I meant it. I hung up and looked for my dog's new leash. The phone call I got before the attacker's wife was from a friend who had stumbled on an exposed tree root the day before, had fallen and broken her ankle. This was in the woods near her house, she said. She told me she had unleashed her retriever and sent him to get help. The dog had returned with the neighbor who called for an ambulance on his cell phone. I told her that my dog would have done the same thing for me, only stopping first to knock over trash cans and try to get laid. I was dismayed by my impulse to make fun of rescue, but there's something so convenient about rescue. Yet would I not have been spared if the man who attacked me had been made to drop the knife because my dog had been with me and had pinned him to the ground? I found the new leash and set out to walk my dog. In the correct grip, the right thumb goes through the loop in the leather before the right hand doubles over to clutch the extra length. This ensures maximum control and should obviate the need to use the left hand. The correct grip causes the dye in the leather to rub off in the creases of the hand. It strengthens the hand when you form a fist, for when the proverbial pendulum swings the hell back. Okay. They're short, right? They're short. I get to pretend I'm really reading poems. I'd always wanted to be a poet. Just a few more. This is called Moonbow. Another dog in here. People are getting away with murder, but I can't get away with having a glass of water in bed. I trade sides with my dog who won't feel what I spilled anyway. From this side of the bed, I see the moon through the window, a full moon with something extra. I've heard about this, but not in upstate New York. In Africa, where the mist from Victoria Falls on the night of a full moon can cause a rainbow to form, a white one, a moonbow. People book vacations to see it. I head downstairs and out to the small backyard. Who else is seeing this? And then I see who else? A small brown bear, or maybe it's black. I freeze, trying not to look scared because that's when they attack, I'm told. A bear is moving calmly from the neighbor's yard into mine. He looks up at the moon. We look at it together. The bear drops to the ground and then stands up pawing a ball. It belonged to my dog, the one who died the month before. The bear sees the dog's water bowl I've kept filled from habit or hope and helps himself to a drink. He wraps himself in the rope from the old tie-out. He swipes at the gone dog's favorite plush toy, a damp, matted lamb with the squeaker torn out. The bear rolls on his back under the freakish white rainbow, his feet like those of one other creature I knew. Logan, I ask, moving a step closer. It's all right. I tell him what has happened since I lost him and assure him that I approved of his valedictory bite, that awful deliveryman who had it coming. I tell him that the deli has gone up for sale, that another antique store has opened, that I hate my haircut, that I have not thrown anything away, that the water in the kitchen has developed a metallic aftertaste. And then the bear is leaving. On his feet and moving to the back of the yard, he stops by the old rope swing. I think he's going to put his legs through the tire and push off toward the moon, but then I see he's got the rope between his teeth. He chews and shakes his head until he has chewed through the rope and the tire falls to the ground, where the bear kicks it out of his way as he tears off through the woods. And let's see. Just two pages. This is called Equivalent. I move a lot, and I'm just curious to know in this audience, like houses, apartments, that kind of moving. Is there anyone here who moves kind of more than anyone you know? Are there people who move a lot? This is for you. Some hands went up. The former owner was supposed to fix the door. Instead, he left behind a pool cleaning robot. He said it was equivalent to fixing the front door, though the house had no pool. It had once had a pool, but the seller's wife had been the swimmer, and when she died 4 years earlier, he filled in the pool. At the closing, the buyer's attorney pointed out that the repair of the door was contractually bound. She brought out the contract and showed him. He said, "You just had to put some shoulder to it." The buyer wanted the house, so she was the one both sides knew would give in. Every couple of months, the seller arrived unannounced to pick up something he had left behind. A wall phone in the den, canoe mounts in the shed. The buyer allowed him to take what he wanted, then asked for help with a difficult chore. She asked him to turn the mower on its side to drain the oil and double-check the basement's radon remediator. Each favor she asked extended the time until the seller's next visit. The weeds in the garden, the buyer bets that this will be enough to keep the seller from coming back to get the child's blackboard in an upstairs bedroom, the child's name formed by animals carved in the wooden frame. And finally, this is called The Quiet Car. That reminds me of when I knew a romance was over. I had not seen this fellow in a while, but he suggested we meet up at the train station and take the Acela somewhere, so I thought we'd have several hours to catch up. And then at the station, we boarded, and he led me to our seats in the quiet car. I was glad to have the rented falling down house through the summer. It was a bicycle ride from the beach, and the owner had let me paint the bedroom a grayish green from the Benjamin Moore Serenity collection. The floors were sandy even before I went to the beach. There was no pool, but I still might buy the raft that is a giant vinyl slice of watermelon. The snowbirds are back as of this holiday weekend, not that they're the ones hurling M80s. The president would have us believe the hurlers of M80s are members of MS-13. Supposedly this little hamlet is their base. But I've been here nearly a year, and I've seen no one threatening. I'm the almost retiree who does not go south for the winter. On the mantel, though the fireplace doesn't work, I've propped the housewarming present from a friend, a small painting of a house that is on fire. It's fancy camping here, with a refrigerator that freezes food as quickly as the freezer compartment. It can't be fixed, said the repairman who tried on 4 occasions. My brother, who owns a bakery in the city, is going to visit next week during a convention. I found that the vegetable drawer is the one part of the refrigerator that will chill instead of freeze, so I will instruct him to keep his butter and cream there. He will examine the failed appliance and ask me if I'd thought to run the adapter for the RL-247 through the Omega conductor or the Accurite barometer. It's a running gag that he understands the work of an electrician. I'll say, yeah, the first one. Yesterday, where someone had dumped a cat-scratched leather recliner in the weedy, empty lot around the corner, an elderly man was found sitting in the chair, quietly disoriented. The recliner looked like a seat on an Amtrak train in coach. The man did not seem to know where he was or how he got there, but he was not fearful, just quiet. He was able to recite his son's email address and list the son's many accomplishments to the police, whom someone called to help. They were kind when they contacted the man's son in another state. But this won't go well, I thought, and chose not to follow the story. Thank you.
Amy, I'm glad you always wanted to be a poet, because you are one. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. I am on the beginning of a book tour that will last most of this month, and I think it was probably on my first stop where the first question that was asked of me kind of stumped me. It won't be the last, but and it was a very simple question, which was something along the lines of, when did you start this book? And the literal intention of that question is pretty clear. And I could have said simply enough that I began it three and a half years ago after I finished my last book, which was a collection of essays called The Destiny Thief. And when I finish one book, I always just start another one. So I started this one. But a probably a less literal but probably truer answer to that question would be, I started this book in 1969 when I was probably, 21 years old. But it was definitely 1969 because that was the year of the first Vietnam War draft lottery. And for which I was eligible, imagine. So at the time, I was slinging hash at a sorority house in Tucson, Arizona. And I remember we hashers, who all entered through the back door, as you would, we had our own tiny little room in the back where we ate our meals before serving the girls theirs. And I remember we asked for special permission that night to bring in a small TV with rabbit ears, so that the hashers, many of us who were eligible that year, were going to find out what our draft numbers were. So we brought in a small TV, and if memory serves, I think we brought some beer in too. But the weird thing about it was that, well, you have to remember, we were young. We were 20, 21, 20 probably, maybe 19. And at that age, you can be aware with part of your brain that your life is about to change, and quite possibly change for the worse. That something is about to happen to you that could be lethal. And yet when you're that age, you think to yourself, well, let's bring some beer. You know, we're all going to be there. And this thing is going to happen. There isn't a damn thing we can do about it. So we brought in some beer, and we all crowded around that little TV. And my sense was that at the beginning of the evening, that we were friends, and we all thought of ourselves as being in the same boat. We were all going to be in the same lottery. So we were, in a sense, in the same boat when we walked in the door. But then the ping pong balls began to drop, and the birthdays began to be announced. And somebody in that room got one of the first ones and knew that his life was just changed. Whatever his plans were now Southeast Asia, because he was certainly going to be drafted. And then more numbers, of course, more birthdays. And at some point you got towards the middle and you think, all right, You know, you've read the projections and you know how many men are being drafted and you know how many men are going over, and you say to yourself, well, what's a safe number? What about 175? What about 195? And some of the guys in the room got that number, got those numbers. And their lives had just changed too, but they couldn't tell how. Because ultimately, maybe they were safe, but then again, maybe they weren't. Whatever they were planning, marriage, graduate school, whatever, they no longer could plan on that. And then it became clear to those in the room that as the numbers continued to come up, that some of the people in the room were safe. I was one of those. 322 my number was. And I gave that number, 322, to one of the characters in this book. There are three young men, Lincoln, Teddy, and Mickey. What they share in common is that they are slinging hash, not at the University of Arizona where I did, a public institution, but a kind of shishi, fancy, very expensive liberal arts college in Connecticut. And what they have in common is the fact that they don't really belong there. They're all scholarship students who have entered a world that they don't know really very much about. And the first part of the prologue of the book, which I will not read, introduces them together as part of this phenomenon of that first draft lottery of 1969. And then there's a space break, and we get to get introduced to them singly. Lincoln first, then Teddy, then Mickey. It would take far too long to read all of those, so I'm just going to read the third of these. They think of themselves as the Three Musketeers. So this is what I'm going to read to you as the third. Mickey Girardi was from a rough working-class neighborhood in West Haven, Connecticut, famous for bodybuilders, Harleys, and ethnic block parties. His parents were Irish and Italian. His old man a construction worker. His mother a secretary for an insurance agency. Both were deeply committed to assimilation. They flew the flag, and not just on the 4th. A veteran of the Second World War, his father could have taken advantage of the GI Bill, but he knew a guy who could get him into the pipe fitters union, which he figured was even better. Mickey was the youngest of 8. The other 7, all girls. And he was spoiled rotten in so many respects. Clothes bought especially for him, his own room right from the start. Okay, it was the size of a closet, but so what? The family's house was large, as it needed to be, but also modest. Only 3 blocks from the beach. It was great in the summer when the cool breezes blew in off the water. But when the wind changed direction, you felt like you were living under the nearby interstate. The traffic noise was so loud. Sunday dinners, you were home, and no excuses. Spaghetti with sausage and meatballs and pork shoulder, braising in tomato sauce. Michael Sr.'s mother's recipe, handed down reluctantly to her Irish daughter-in-law, with a few key ingredients left out just for the sake of contrast. Family first, America second. Or maybe vice versa these days, with so many grubby long hairs always flashing their imbecilic peace signs. Everything else, a distant third. For Mickey, music came first. His first job was sweeping up the mall music store where he had seen a Fender Stratocaster in the window and fallen in love. After the guitar came an amp. In a band at age 13. By 16, sneaking into raunchy New Haven bars and sitting in with older guys whose girlfriends didn't wear bras and who seemed to enjoy revealing this fact by bending over in front of him. Mickey would later joke to Lincoln and Teddy that he'd had a hard-on for all of 1965. I catch you doing drugs with those guys, his father warned. You're going to be the first kid in America beaten to death with a Fenton guitar. Fender, Mickey corrected him. Well, bring it here then, His father said. "Smart ass, we'll do it right now. Save time." About the last thing in the world that Mickey wanted to do was go to college. In school, he had always hovered between mediocre and piss poor. But all of his sisters had gone or were going, and college was what his mother wanted. Community college, live at home, that was the plan. Mr. Easy, his mother called him, always the path of least resistance. Mickey supposed she was right. He wasn't terribly ambitious. But he failed to see what was so wrong with staying in West Haven. With his sisters gone, there was plenty of room except on Sundays and holidays. Unfortunately, even to go to community college, you had to take the SAT. So one Saturday morning, Mickey did. Not wanting to disappoint his mother by being the only kid ever rejected from a community college because of his SATs, he declined a gig the night before and actually got a good night's sleep. He figured it wouldn't kill him to try for once. Tuition was cheap, and if he did well enough to snag a few bucks to help with books and expenses, it had put him in good with the old man. When the results came back, his mother met his father at the door. "Have a look at this," she said, pointing to their son's score, which was in the top 2%. "The kid's brilliant." Since Mickey was the only kid in the room, his father looked around to make sure there wasn't another one hiding somewhere. "Which kid?" he said. "This one," his mother said. "Your son." His father scratched his head. "This one right here?" "Yes, our Michael." His father studied the SAT results, and then his wife, and then Mickey, and then his wife again. "All right," he said finally, "who's the father?" "I've always wondered." The next day, Michael Sr. was still trying to figure it out. "Take a walk with me," he said, grabbing Mickey's shoulder with a meaty paw. When they were down the block and out of earshot, he said, "All right, come clean, and I promise I won't be mad. Who'd you get to take that test for you?" Mickey felt his left eye twitch. "You know what, Pop?" he said. "Don't say it," his father warned. "Fuck you," Mickey said, completing his thought. Senior stopped walking and threw up his hands. "You said it," he said. Then he cuffed his son on the back of the head hard enough to make Mickey's eyes water. "Help me out here," he said, "because I want to understand. You're saying this test is on the up and up?" Mickey nodded. "You're telling me you're smart?" "I'm not telling you anything," Mickey said. "You're telling me that all this time you could have done good in school and made your mother proud?" Mickey felt that seeing things in this light took some of the luster off of his near-perfect SAT. He shrugged. "What were we thinking?" his father said, more to himself than his son. "We were doing so good with girls." "Sorry," Mickey said. "Okay, listen up, because this is what's going to happen. You're going to go to college, and you're going to do good. No discussion. You either make your mother proud, or you don't come home." Mickey started to object, only to discover that he wasn't sure he wanted to. He himself was still processing the remarkable SAT results, and had begun thinking beyond community college. At West Haven High, when word got around about his SATs, several of his former teachers stopped him in the hall. "Hey, what have we been telling you?" was what they all wanted to know. So instead of objecting to his old man's command, he said, "Can I major in music?" His father looked at the sky, then at him. "Why do you always have to press your luck?" he said. "Can I major in music?" Mickey said. "Fine," Senior said. "Major in fencing guitars for all I care." Mickey thought about correcting him, but his father did have a point. He was always pushing his luck. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for coming. I just wanted to know from both of you if there's something that you would tell us that you know about writing fiction that you didn't know when you started out.
What an interesting question. Wow.
Everything.
You started before I did.
Well, I think I would say I started kind of taking lessons. I went to graduate school and started taking workshops, and I was learning. I was learning the techniques of the trade. I was learning how to write dialogue, and I didn't know how to do that. And I learned that conflict was probably going to drive the story more than plot would. And I learned the intricacies of point of view. But I think more than, I didn't know really any of those things, but it didn't take me long to pick up the technical stuff. I had very good teachers. And so all of that came to me pretty quickly. But basically, what I didn't know when I started writing fiction was who I was. I was still trying to figure that out. And for a lot of writers, that's the final piece of the puzzle. The technical things that you learn are not important in and of themselves. They're important because they have to be in service of something. And if you don't know who you are yet, if you haven't figured that out, if you don't know what your subject is, if you don't know who and what you love, all the technique in the world isn't going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, nice. I sure do like your question. Something that comes to my mind is, was put more eloquently later by a friend of mine, but the idea that if you, as my friend put it, if you wear your heart on the page, readers will read to figure out how you solved being alive. So I think I can improve on his phrasing, but it is that idea that I use a fair amount of autobiographical material. It always gets mangled up and changed, but I didn't even know you could start there, really. I think it was the idea that what I came to see was well known to a lot of everyone else, that in a way the more personal you are on the page, the more widely it can be received by certain readers. I didn't realize that would happen. Thank you.
I have a question for Richard Russo. I've read all of your fiction, and I love it all. Your characters seem real to me, all of them. Are they?
Well, I should probably just say yes, because that's what you just said. If they're real to you, that's as real as I care for them to be. Really, but I don't know how to say this in a way that doesn't sound incredibly arrogant, but I feel the same way about them. I don't know much about them at the beginning, but they talk to me and I learn. And by the time the books are finished, I have great affection for them. As to their reality, all I can say is just thank you. If they're living within you, and if they continue to, after you put the book down, wonder about them from time to time in upcoming, months and years, and say, I wonder what Sully's up to now, because he's surely up to something, then thank you.
Amy, I wanted to ask a question. I guess it's about format. You seemed to insist that, or maybe Jason did it in the intro, that these were short stories, but they sure feel as a felt sensation to the listener, to me, they sure feel like poems. And it seems
You
like,
can stop right there. Thank you. It's not going to get better than that, whatever you have to say.
So I'm just curious, in your mind, could you just walk me through a little bit your thought of what the format distinction is that would have you not comfortable calling them poems, or even have other people call them poems, but insist on the short story definition? I'm just curious how you see that.
Yeah, thank you. I've always had an understanding of the sentence. I recognize a good sentence when I read it and when I can write one. I've never understood the line in poetry. I don't understand line breaks. I mean, I've read endlessly about it, how to do it. It just doesn't get through. So I don't feel I would ever call myself a poet. Perhaps some of my short stories have been published in anthologies of prose poems, which made me very happy. That's a little closer. There's a definition of the short story that I particularly like. I think it was from Irving Howe, years and years ago, decades ago, who said, "It's like a short story, only more so." Yeah. So if you think you have to get rid of everything extraneous in a story, wait till you try to write a short. The great writer George Saunders used to do, years ago, he was teaching at Syracuse, he used to do something, or have his grad students do something which I thought was great preparation. He'd have them write a page of fiction. He'd say, okay, fine, now cut it in half. And then he'd have them cut it in half again. So you're really getting down to what is essential. What is essential? You're looking at a moment. You don't have a narrative. You don't have time for much of a narrative. People say, well, poems are image-driven or language-driven, but so are many short stories. So that distinction doesn't really serve. But I think because I normally write fiction, I think of them as short stories. Friends who are poets write sometimes pieces that look the same on the page, and they are prose poems. So it's kind of a little bit up for grabs still, which is fine, I think. Thank you for that.
Thanks, guys, again, for coming out. Question for both of you. What problems do you sort of face when you start to write or during your actual writing process, and what sort of methods do you take to overcome them so you genuinely like the work that you produce?
Can you just repeat just the first phrase? What problems do you run into?
Yeah, so if you have a writer's block, or if you don't like a line of dialogue, or if this character doesn't seem to be going anywhere, what sort of as you're writing, what are the steps that you take to sort of overcome the things, the frailties in your work almost?
Well, I was going to say that the problem I face trying to write, my dogs. Yeah, there are the problems every single writer has trying to write, but honest to God, I mean, the really truthful answer is huge dogs, including foster dogs. So they're like, where am I? They're just out of control. And they just stare at you. But it's that stare that says, what about our needs?
That's right.
For entertainment, for snacks, And I'm not being glib. I mean, it's really it's being stared at by dogs. So it's my honest answer.
Richard?
Although I have to say, I think if you didn't have the dogs, you'd find something else that was problematic.
Sure enough.
I don't have dogs, and so I found many things to fill in the problem dog slot. One of the issues for me has always been that I have a much better ear than eye, which means that basically that that dialogue is my strong suit. I've been just listening to people, and my ear is pretty good, or it's over the years anyway. But when your ear is better than your eye, or vice versa, it doesn't matter, whatever your strong suit is, you can get out ahead of yourself. And when sometimes I have my characters talking to each other, and it's like I'm taking dictation. I know what they're about to say, how they're going to say it, and so I'm writing as fast as I can. And sometimes at the end of like even as short a time as half an hour, I filled up 2 or 3 pages. But it's like these characters are just their voices in a vacuum. They're just for fiction to be real. It has to be sensual. Flannery O'Connor used to say that the stuff of fiction is very humble. It's wood and steel and leaf and water, and so the real world. You have to see it. She also used to advise her students to go out and with a pad of paper and draw, because she figured that they weren't going to have much of a chance of writing good stories if they weren't looking at things. And she didn't care about the drawing. She just wanted them to look, for God's sake. Because stories are not about man's inhumanity to man, at least not at the beginning. That's an idea. But first you got to see the world. And that, for me, has always been the more challenging aspect of writing. And how do you conquer it? Well, first you recognize it. You recognize that that's what you're doing. And then you force yourself to slow down. Because if you're missing the real world, if you're missing the material world, you're actually missing it. That's a door that will open into meaning if you let it. But if you're not paying attention to it, you're never going to get there.
I was riveted by your story about the lottery. And I'm the same generation of you as you are, but of course I'm a woman. So did not have the exactly same experience, although my brother and my male friends all did.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably had some pretty close friends.
I certainly did. But what struck me, not only in your memory, but also perhaps if that memory also occurs in the book, is that you guys were going to be serving the sorority sisters.
Right.
And I thought, I wonder if there is in the book, to any extent, the perspective of the women or the wonderful potentialities of interaction between the young men who are in the kitchen, hearing about their lives, and the young women.
Well, the first thing to say is that all 3 of these young men are in love with the same girl. And she is a theta, and she is I want to say too much about this because I don't want to spoil it for you. But the scene that I described to you from my own life, it departs right there in terms of the book, because when they all get their draft numbers and they leave the sorority house, this girl that all 3 of them are in love with is there. She's waiting for them out back in the dark parking lot, and they have to tell her what their numbers are, and she becomes I don't know, D'Artagnan. She becomes the fourth Musketeer. So, and there are other strong women characters, because see, the thing that happens in this book is that these characters are like 19 for the first holiday weekend of the book, and they're 66 for the second. So there have been some women in between.
Well, I've read all your novels, but I'm particularly interested in Straight Man. I work at Penn State College.
Oh.
And I'm
so sorry. You look
I'm
okay.
guessing. I manage okay. I'm guessing Altoona is by the scenery and all of that. I could tell. But I wondered how long you were there. I mean, those characters. I read the book once I started working in around the year 2000. They're still there. Those characters. I just. I think you almost answered my question though, when you said you listen. I thought, okay, that's maybe the answer anyway, but I just wondered how long you were there and how those characters developed.
I was not there. I was not 1 minute longer than I had to be. The Penn State University system, with its various branch campuses, is one of the most diabolical institutional models that you can imagine, because the people who live the good life up in State College, they had many of them had 2 teaching loads, whereas we at the branch campuses where I was at Penn State Altoona, it was 4-4 at the time, and 3 of those would be freshman composition. So yeah, I mean, it was just, as I said, I think in that book, really they should have dispensed amphetamines at the campus dispensary just to keep us awake grading papers. It was pretty brutal. But in addition to that, you were also, because you were a member of, say, the English department at Penn State, you were part of something. You were part of the campus, but you were also part of something, the larger institution. You were part of the English department, which would decide on your tenure. And they didn't care about the quality of your teaching at all. What they wanted you to do was publish articles. So if you were at one of the branch campuses, as I was, I mean, it's just you were told by the local people that nothing matters but teaching, and then you would meet your department chair and would tell you nothing matters but your scholarship, and then you'd go home and try to figure that out. So I was only there for 3 years and was paroled.
Before we go over to Did here, Amy, I sort of have a similar question for you that's been asked. Are you interested in exploring, as I gushed in the intro, I love Reasons to Live. Are you interested in exploring maybe where some of those characters are, or have you, in your flights of fancy, pictured that, and is it something you want to write about ever?
Bringing characters from past work.
Right.
Current. I did that twice. I've done it twice. 2 stories. The interesting thing was, one of them, it had to be pointed out to me that I had done it. And I was like, yeah, you're so right. So how could I not have known? But I didn't know. And then the second time, yeah. And interestingly enough, I think that, as I remember it, I really already miss the magazine, Tin House, the great literary and arts magazine that is not publishing anymore as of very recently. But one of those instances of an old story turning up again, both the original and the later story were published in Tin House, as it happened a few years apart. I did think... There's one story I wrote, it's in my second book, and I used to read it a lot at universities and writing programs because it was written in 2 parts. It was written, here was the first part of the story, and then there was this big space break, and the second part of the story appeared to be correcting or substituting the truth for what I'd made up. It's a story called The Harvest, and it was one of the only stories that's ever been fun for me to write. It just was fun, and I've thought of going back to that and saying, you know, the thing about writing the so-called true version of what you've just done in real fiction is that the true version wasn't true.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can't stop yourself, and so I started out to write the true version, but it went off that way, you know, the way things do, and you let it be the story, and you just let it go, and I wonder where that's going to go. Yeah. So I thought it would be interesting. It could be a lifelong process of, if I kept revisiting that story, trying to tell the real version, and never being able to do it. So since you brought this up, you know what? for you, I'm gonna do that.
I appreciate it.
I wanted
you.
something along those same lines that I wanted to ask you, because this is something especially true of the short, or so it seems to me. Correct me, please. One of the reasons that I have trouble writing short stories, never mind short stories, is that it seems to me that I have to have my hands on the reins. I'm clutching the reins tightly because I don't want it to do exactly what you described, to go off somewhere where with a short story in particular, perhaps it's just my own delusion, but when I start out to write something that is going to be compact, I start pulling on the reins and clutching them really tightly almost from the start, whereas the novel I kind of give myself permission to just almost throw the reins away and let the horse go where it wants. But am I wrong about that? Or how tightly do you feel? Your short stories feel so sculpted, so spare, so intense, and concentrated.
I would not presume to say you are wrong about anything you would do in the realm of writing or probably elsewhere. But it's interesting that I absolutely get what you mean by you feel like you're holding the reins even tighter because you have less room, and it's going to get away from you. And oh no, you've got to rein it in because it's almost over. But the big reward is if you let the reins go, even in this short form. And as I usually think of it as just saying, well, you have to, if you're paying attention, you really do see every time. Where you have a choice, you can force it, pulling the reins, you can force it to be your story that you set out to write, or you can let it become the story's story and let it go where
well, that's fascinating.
You might not understand yet. So it's a leap of faith. It's there's a point of you can study writing and you've written about writing and you can figure out, you can learn a lot of things, but there's a point at which there's mystery as to how it happens, and I don't want to explain it all away.
No.
No. I think it deserves to remain mysterious at some point.
Yeah, the underground Disney tour doesn't really. It does.
Yeah. Give up the reins.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can, I have a quick, short one for each of you. Amy, I'm wondering if there are particular poets who called to you or led you toward writing these beautiful poems. That's my question for you. And the question for Richard, however you can think of this best, you were talking about your ear getting ahead of your eye. If you were a blind writer or you were teaching a blind person, how might you translate that away from the eye?
You got to go first on this one. I have to think. I'll be thinking while you're answering.
May I ask, is that your working dog?
Yes, it is.
Very beautiful. I volunteered for 13 years at Guiding Eyes for the Blind. I was a puppy raiser, a pre-trainer, and your dog is magnificent. Congratulations. Is he? I might need to talk to you after, because he could well be related to one of my own. Because I got to keep a few from there. And I've already forgotten, oh dear, what was the...
Poets who inspired you.
Oh, poets. Well, there is one who I have reread more than anybody, and that's Sharon Olds. And you look like you know her work. Yeah. She is accessible. She has a genius for metaphor. She's fearless, though she wouldn't say she's fearless, because she feels fear, or to be brave in writing means to do something you don't want to do, and she wants to do it. But I have learned so much from reading and rereading her many books. So there are others, some names you would know and some you might not. Great guy in Michigan, John Rubicki. Rybicki, several books out. Marie Howe, Mark Doty. These are contemporary poets. Jory Graham, in particular, her book Place, fairly recently. But I'm a great rereader, as much as I try and stay sort of current with what's coming out. There is a kind of sacred shelf that I think all writers have, and Sharon is facing out. She's facing out on that shelf. Thank you for that.
First of all, thank you for your question. You can tell the good ones because you don't know the answers. I think the first thing that I would do if I were teaching a writer who was blind or partly blind, the first thing that I would do would be to listen to you for a while and see what you were trying to accomplish with your work, because ultimately that's part of what you're doing with every writer that you teach. First question you're asking is, who are you? What are your aims? What are your goals? And so before I prescribed anything, I think that you and I would probably sit down for a while and just talk until I got to know you, and then maybe I would have some suggestions. But part of that would be to find out how comfortable you are as a non-sighted writer with describing the real world, and how important that is to you, how important sight, the descriptions of the physical world would be, because there are forms where that isn't as important. I mean, I would suggest, you might want to write drama, because a much larger portion of a play is going to be dialogue. Basically, if you look at a play like The Glass Menagerie, it all takes place in one room. And you have a few stage directions at the beginning of the play, and just enough to let the reader know where you are. And then the play, when it's actually staged, that's going to take it over. It's not part of your job. The set designers are going to go in and build. They're going to go in and build the damn thing, no matter what you say on the page. They're going to translate that into a real physical world. And so, I would say that screenwriting, any of the dramatic forms, but screenwriting, television writing, playwriting, why not take advantage of your strengths in choosing the form that you want to work in. Did I even come close to answering your? Okay.
Well, a few things. First, I can attest from prior experience that is a very good dog. And second of all, I hope you join us upstairs for the signing here in a few minutes. And third of all, let's give it up for tonight's authors. It was wonderful.